Today we're looking at finding records of the lower courts, the bench of magistrates that later became the courts of petty sessions, which later became the local courts. In New South Wales, prior to 1824, there was only a two-tiered court system. You would have the criminal offence, police involvement, and then the matter would go before the bench of magistrates or the court of criminal jurisdiction for more serious matters. After 1824, there was a three-tiered system for courts introduced. The bench of magistrates, first of all, for lower matters. It became the Court of Petty Sessions in 1832, and then the matter of more serious nature would go on to Quarter Sessions or the Supreme Court, if very serious indeed. And the Clerk of Peace would gather the depositions or the written evidence for both the Quarter Sessions and the Supreme Court. Just an overall access to court records to set everything in place. The lower courts, local court, bench of magistrates, courts of petty sessions, the records are open to public access after 30 years. Matters involving children, either as the victim or perpetrator of the crime, and maintenance records are closed to public access for 100 years. Jail records relating to individual offenders are open after 70 years. Quarter Sessions records are open before 1955, except matters concerning children, which are closed for 100 years. Supreme Court, criminal matters, the records relating to the hearings of criminal matters are opened after 75 years. Court Reporting Office transcripts are open after 30 years unless heard in camera or in closed proceedings, in which case they are opened after 75 years. Always remember you can apply to the relevant court or agency for permission to access records which fall into the closed period. Keep in mind, there is no comprehensive index to all court cases. That is why you need to establish the basic facts first. Always remember, not all court cases have survived, and especially for the lower courts, we often have large gaps in our records. Some courts may have basic information, such as a register entry, while others may have all the depositions or court papers for the particular matter may have survived. In some instances, a newspaper account may give the fullest account, but do watch for a newspaper bias. Before you start, you need to establish the basic facts: the name of the person or persons involved, the date or year that the matter has been heard or tried, the jurisdiction of the court. Is it at the local level, Quarter Sessions, or Supreme? Where a place such as Sydney or the name of the town is known, this will also help to try and determine if we hold the records. Additional information may also help, such as the nature of the crime or the matter to be heard. This would help us to establish which court or the jurisdiction of the court that we should be looking at. If you know the name of the judge or the magistrate, this too might help. Remember, the more serious the crime, the higher the court that will hear the matter. Murder can only be tried by the Supreme Court of New South Wales. With appeals, appeals are always heard by a higher court. An appeal against the judgment of a Court of Petty Sessions will be heard by Quarter Sessions, now of course District Court. An appeal against a Quarter Sessions or a District Court judgment will be heard by the Supreme Court. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at court records. Where can I find the basic facts? New South Wales State Archives website has a number of online indexes. You may have first come across the matter by searching the digitised newspapers on Trove, and do check local newspapers, especially for local court matters. Police gazettes are now available on Trove, or you may have come across the matter when you've found a jail record or a jail photo. Annotations on official documents such as tickets of leave, certificates of freedom, marriage or divorce, inquest records may all have information that may help you to determine which court you need to look at. Family sources. People may remember or know that there was a court case at such a court in such a year. Local indexes done by those family history societies and local groups may also be your first port of call. Police gazettes 1862 to 1962 contain information about crimes committed, criminals wanted, criminals apprehended, prisoners discharged, persons on good behaviour bonds, missing persons, and police appointments and promotions. Police gazettes over 70 years old are open to public access. For the years 1862 through to 1930, they're available on microfilm. They're also available on Ancestry, and they're also available now on Trove. For records after 1930 of the police gazettes, you'd need to visit our reading room in order to look at them. But do keep in mind they're open to public access after 70 years. So when you're looking at a police gazette, this is the sort of example that you may find. You find the entry that you're interested in, and then you see committed for trial at the next quarter sessions to be holden at Parramatta. So you would then need to check if we had quarter sessions records for Parramatta for that particular time. In the police gazettes, you'll often see the different circuit courts and quarter sessions listed with the return of prisoners. Once again, take down that information and then you can check with us. Check the online index to the criminal depositions received 1848 through to 1921, and also check online newspapers for more information. In a jail photo description book under convictions, you'll see when and where tried. In this case, at Yass quarter sessions, QS. But here's one that you should be interested in if you're interested in the local courts. In this case, one of the places she's been tried at is Newcastle PO. PO stands for Police Office, and that is equal to the Court of Petty Sessions. So you could then check with us whether we had whether the records for that period of time and that court had survived. An annotation on a certificate of freedom or ticket of leave. In this case, you can see that the person has been tried at Sydney QS. Once again, Sydney quarter sessions. You have the date of the hearing, and then you could check with our staff whether or not the records had survived for that court for that period of time. On our website, on State Archives website, you'll see under quick links, we have a number of items that you should take note of. There's the online indexes and the key name search, and there's also research A to Z. So when I refer to research A to Z, that's where you would find information that are in the fact sheets. So sometimes if you want to read a bit more background detail or find out more information on a particular topic, go to research A to Z. So in this case, if you were to go in, you could go into, you'll see alphabetically arranged. This is the online index. You will see courts, C for courts, and then it shows you all the various indexes that we have. And there's more than what is showing on the screen. In this case, As we're talking about the lower courts, you would be interested in the Bench of Magistrates Index 1788 through to 1820. If you wanted to search the index, you can do that. If you want some more background detail, always go into more about this index, and there you will see exactly what's been indexed, how many entries have been recorded, and the type of information that will be given. If we go in and we look, you can see that these are some of the cases that have been heard before the Bench of Magistrates. You'll see that there's lots of examples of theft, turbulent conduct, drunkenness and abusive language, stealing wheat, refusing to fulfill a contract, withholding money, receiving stolen goods, selling bread deficient in weight, theft of a silk handkerchief, licenses granted to retail beer, ale and cider. So just keep that in mind. That'll give you a good overview of some of the types of matters that will come before the Bench of Magistrates. In this case, you can put in your person's name, and we have Mary Jackson, who was being tried for theft on the 19th of February 1788. If you go to the reference given, you'll see this is the type of information given in COD 17. It's quite a full account. You can see that the writing is often difficult to read, but these are the nature of the records created at the time. Once you know the facts, check New South Wales State Archives website. We've just had a look at the indexes, and you know if you want to look at the fact sheets, you go to Research A to Z. There's also Collection Search, our online catalogue, and I'll be showing you more about that towards the end of the talk. You can ring or email to check if we hold records which cover the particular time period you require, but please note that we do not offer a research service. Now let's just look at some definitions and some terms used. When we're talking about magistrates, they're the justices of the peace. And in colonial times, they were the local magistrate. When you see an annotation that says PO, it refers to police office. WPO, Water Police Office. And keep in mind, with our maritime nature of the early port of Sydney, many offences were committed around the water, around the coast, so of course the police office would have been involved. Unfortunately, very few of those records have survived. When you see an annotation that says PM, it means police magistrate, and that's generally a paid magistrate, an official in charge of the police constables. A stipendiary magistrate is a magistrate paid by the government. The growth of population and the spread of settlement necessitated an increase in the number of magistrates from 21 in 1822 to 83 in 1827. Paid stipendiary magistrates were first appointed in 1825 and were used increasingly. In more remote areas, the commissioners of Crown lands were made special magistrates. So what may you find in the records of the lower courts? You may find criminal matters heard, and what most people would like would be the bench books or the depositions, which are the court papers. You might find police charge and summons books, copies of letters sent. These have survived mainly in the colonial period. Local convict records, and these should not be overlooked. We'll have a look at some of those. You may find records relating to licensing matters, child maintenance matters, which are heard for which are closed for 100 years, small debt registers, but what has survived will vary from place to place. So if you see something today and you become very enthused about it, keep in mind you need to check for the local area in which you're interested, because not all records have survived for all areas, and many records of the lower courts are very patchy indeed. The first sittings of the Bench of Magistrates was in February 1788 in Sydney. The Bench of Magistrates were replaced by the Courts of Petty Sessions in August of 1832. Keep in mind when you're using an advanced search in our collection search, then choose Agency under Court, and you can put in Bench of Magistrates, Courts of Petty Sessions, or local courts. And I will show you how to search that towards the end of the presentation. Do check our online index to the proceedings of the Judge Advocates Bench 1788 to 1821. There's also Shirley Doolan's published index to the Bench of Magistrates returns in New South Wales 1822 to 1828, and the index to Bench of Magistrates returns in New South Wales 1830 to 1831, and these are available in our reference library. Do keep in mind that the records can be very incomplete, and especially the depositions. They generally start from about the 1960s. So check what has survived for the court of your particular interest. Local courts replaced Courts of Petty Sessions in 1985. The first Bench of Magistrates was convened in Sydney on the 19th of February 1788. By 1800, sittings were regularly held in Parramatta and the Hawkesbury district, and the use of magisterial proceedings had become widespread in the colony by the 1820s. As we've seen, there is an online index to the Sydney Bench of Magistrates records. The index also includes references to regulations, licensings, and other business activities. I thought you would also like to see this, and I particularly wanted to point out to you that we have surviving minutes of proceedings of the Bench of Magistrates at Parramatta. Now, it only covers a relatively short period of time from October of 1820 through to March of 1822. It has been copied into COD format, which is a bound Xerox format, onto COD 487 and is available in our reading room. It was an archival astray, so there are some pages which are missing. And here you can see an example. I particularly wanted to point this out to you because it's very good. There's lots of women who end up in the female factory or from the female factory. You'll see the first case of Anne Coomey that you can see on your screen. She killed a goose that was not her property, and so she was taken before the magistrates, and she was ordered to be sentenced to the female factory. If you're interested in local colonial trials and court records, I would suggest looking at Chapter 11 in the published guide to convicts and convict administration, available in our reading room and also at some libraries. Do keep in mind this is not the convict guide that you will see electronically under Research A to Z for convicts. This is a published guide and it has a couple of 100 pages. If you go to Chapter 11, you'll see the colonial trials and court records. They're arranged by place, and we also listed where we know that there are indexes to those records. In some cases, these may have been compiled by interested persons or local family history or historical societies. So there you can see examples there showing the records listed for Picton or Stone Quarry as it was at the time, and then showing you what we have for Port Macquarie, Port Stephens and Queanbeyan. So don't forget, that is in Chapter 11 of the published Convict Guide. And there you can see some more examples. Okay. The local bench was very involved with convicts in the area, and I think a lot of people that are doing convicts forget to look at the records created by the local bench. Do keep in mind that with convicts, they could not be punished or flogged unless they'd been taken before the bench of magistrates. And it was the bench of magistrates, later the courts of petty sessions, that would order their punishment. So let's just have a look. Keep in mind that not all convict records have survived for all areas, but if you know the area where your convict was, then I would suggest that you have a look and see what records have survived. The example I'm using is from Bathurst. So there's annual returns of applications for assigned servants, and this means assigned convict servants. There's a ticket of leave muster roll covering the period 1838 to 44. There's a register of descriptions of ticket of leave holders in the area of Bathurst from June 1843 through to 1846. And there's a list of Norfolk Island expirees in the Bathurst area around about 1850. So this is the example of the ticket of leave muster roll for the Bathurst area. It has been copied onto microfilm reel 895, and as you can see, it is just that. It is reporting the presence of that particular convict at the muster roll, where they are, and as you can see, it may give you some additional information. For example, the person towards the middle of the page that has received a conditional pardon. If you go further down, you can see that another convict has had their ticket of leave altered for the district of Carcoar, and another one altered to the district of Mudgee. So just keep some of these extra records in mind. They may just give you that little bit more information about your particular convict. So we talk about bench books, but what do bench books contain? What are bench books? They're the minutes of proceedings of the bench, noting the date and the place of meeting, the magistrates present, the detail of the parties or parties, the charge or cause, and summary of evidence. The benches held special annual sittings for the granting of licenses, and these would usually be entered into the bench books, unless they kept, of course, a separate register. So do keep that in mind. Have a look for your local area of your interest, either where your family settled or where your convict was sent, and see what information is available and for what time periods the records have survived. So this is an example from the Braidwood bench book, and you can see the evidence that's given, the summary of the matter that appears on your screen, and it was all about stealing a cleaver to the value of £2. So quite good information. And here also for Braidwood, you can see how when people are brought before the bench for drunk and disorderly conduct, there's really not very much information given. Normally just the name of the person. One of the examples, you can see the person simply pleaded guilty, and then they were fined, or in default of payment of the fine, to be imprisoned for 48 hours. Depositions, they're the court papers, and they really replace the bench books. So when bench books stop being used, of course, they go to loose court papers, and they're filed by the date. They're the record of the daily proceedings. Frequently, for larger courts, the agendas of each day's business and full details of each case brought before the court. For the smaller courts, depositions of proceedings may include the children's court records, and sometimes they're interfiled. So that's why we have to be very careful when we're issuing records in the reading room. We have to be careful that there aren't children's court records enclosed, as children's court records are closed for 100 years. Many of the larger courts of petty sessions will have separate filings for their children's court records. Most depositions, the court papers, have survived from about circa 1960. That's also the date that the first Archives Act in New South Wales came into being. To access depositions after 1982, which are no longer required as state archives, you should contact the registrar or the clerk of the local court to determine where those records are held. Okay, this is an example from Milton, and Milton is one of the local courts where some early depositions have survived. In this case, you can see it's from 1928, and the offence was, did drive a motor lorry without having the prescribed number plate affixed hitherto. So you can see quite clearly that the defendant was called 3 times and does not appear. So the case was heard without him. Sergeant Simmons states the defendant rang up and asked to be allowed to plead guilty. And so it goes on. Eventually, the person was convicted and fined 20 shillings and 20 shillings, and the costs for 3 days hard and failure to pay would result in 3 days hard labour or 14 days to pay the fine. Another one also from Milton is the case of stealing 11 rabbit traps to the value of £1, the property of one Patrick Philip Egan. And so you can see the evidence given, it's typed up, you can read about it, and then you can find out what has taken place. Here you can see a record of exhibits. The bundle of rabbit traps was shown in the court, and the defendant said, I went down the gully, not with the intention of stealing the traps, but to get away from the wind. I accidentally came across the traps. So they were convicted and fined £5 or 10 days hard labour, and the traps to be restored to the owner after 21 days. Police charge and summons books. The early volumes in this series are divided into 2 sections, charges and summonses. Under charges, the following details are recorded: date of trial, number of case, name of prisoner, offence, if previously convicted, and particulars if known, result of the trial, signature of magistrates, and whether imprisoned or a fine paid. Under summonses, the following details are recorded: date of trial, number of case, complainant, defendant, offence or cause of action, act under which tried, fees paid, how disposed of, signature of magistrates, and whether imprisoned or fined. So there you can see an example from Golgong, and the volume covers the period of time 1887 through to 1897. Correspondence of the court, of the local court, is always very important and can give you much more detail. But do keep in mind, because not all copies of letters sent or correspondence have survived from the local bench. So do check, and I will show you how to do that just under the particular local court. But also to keep in mind that in the Colonial Secretary's papers, 1788 to 1825, if you look at our online index under B, for Bench of Magistrates, you will see that there's correspondence concerning the following benches from their magistrates, and you can also check under the names of individual magistrates. So let's have a look at some of the records. The copies of letters sent, and this example is from Kiama. The copies of letters sent cover the period of time 1862 to 1892. And this may be particularly useful where you are looking for a particular matter. Some things, as you can see, are very routine. They might simply be asking for stationery or for forms to be forwarded, but you can certainly find some very interesting letters. I've enlarged the letter at the top of the page on the left, and you can see here that they've written to the Reverend M. Darcy at Shoalhaven. Reverend Sir Patrick McGovern, who was married by you on the 14th of February last to Catherine Connolly, came to this office respecting the registration of his marriage. I informed him that I had not received his certificate from you. Will you be so good as to forward the same to me if the marriage took place at Broughton Creek and in the police district of Kiama, as it is legally necessary that all marriages solemnized in this district should be registered in Kiama. Okay. Correspondence letter books. I wanted to talk to you about an example that we hold from Cobar, the letter book of Walterus LeBron Brown, covering the period of time 1895 through to 1908. Keep in mind that he held the following positions. He was police magistrate, mining warden, visiting justice to the jail, coroner, licensing magistrate, district registrar in bankruptcy, deputy sheriff, guardian of minors, and members of the local land board. So a case like that, where people are wearing many hats and fulfilling many different positions, the letter books of the courts, the copy of the letters sent, may contain invaluable information. One thing that many people overlook are the registers of auctioneers, hawkers, and other licenses that were maintained by the courts of petty sessions. You can just search under collection search. You can use courts of petty sessions, or you can just put in hawkers. But I think it's probably best to search by the particular local court and just see what there is covering your period of interest. In the registers, they give the date of the hearing, the name of the applicant, a native of what country, sometimes included, the nature of the license, the result of the application, and the magistrate's signature. They have not survived from all places for all periods of time, and they're not indexed by person's name. So you really do need to look through them if you think that your person may have been mentioned. This is an example of the register of applications for hawkers, auctioneers, and other licenses from Parkes Courts of Petty Sessions. And as you can see, the example in front of you is showing 1915, and there's not only people receiving stage carriage licenses, but also a hawker's license on foot. So do keep that in mind. And with the one at the top of the page, the stage carriage license, they've even specified that it's only allowed to carry 8 passengers on the inside and 2 passengers on the outside of the coach. Here we have the Register of Applications for Auctioneers, Hawkers and other licenses, this time from Bathurst. It's covering a lovely large period of time, 1865 through to 1957. And there you can see the ones at the top. Hawker's licenses for a horse and a cart, and a hawker's license on foot. And on foot would mean that the hawker was carrying his pack of products, generally on his back, going to sell his products from place to place. You can also see that there's an auctioneer's license, and also down the bottom of the page, a transfer of a publican's license. So don't forget to look for those. The small debts registers. I always regard these as a very underused source. The record of hearing, the name of the plaintiff and defendant, the cause of the action, the amount, the judgment and the amount of judgment. Once again, most have not been indexed, so you will need to know the period of time of financial hardship if you're researching your family history. And here's an example of the small debts register from Newcastle in 1871. As you can see, you're not getting a great deal of information, but for example, you can see the very first entry on the page, the cause of the action was the rent due. So it was really the failure of the person to pay the rent. You can see various other ones down the page that give you some idea of the things sold. So goods sold and delivered, breach of agreement, work and labour done where people haven't paid people for these particular activities. Now, other series that you may come across from particular benches. Judgment books record the magistrate's judgment, and it doesn't give very much detailed information, but it would prove that a particular matter was heard. For some areas, they're registers of blankets issued to Aboriginal people. You may come across registers of spirit merchants and brewers or licenses issued, registers of fees, fines and other monies collected. As mundane an item as the list of furniture and law books that were in the court at the time. Others may be unique to a particular place or time, such as the list of Norfolk Island expiries in Bathurst area, which we mentioned earlier. So do have a look and make sure that you've seen what there is for the court that most interests you. So how to find those records? Go to our home page and I would choose Advanced Search. Click on Advanced Search, and then the easiest way to do it is type in the name of the local court. And I would put the local court. You can put Bathurst Court of Petty Sessions or Bathurst Bench of Magistrates. But if you put in Bathurst Local Court, you should get a listing of all the records that we hold, because it will list all the predecessor agencies. So just have a look at that. Click on, when the entry comes up, click on the red for Bathurst Local Court, and up comes a long list of items. You can certainly click on the red title, whether it be bench books, summons case register, annual alphabetical returns of applications for assigned servants, and it will give you then the date range and more details about it. But keep in mind, this is going over a number of pages, so you do need to keep scrolling to see exactly what there is. And it will also include other records that you may see, such as the bench books for Hill End, where Bathurst has become the successor agencies. But let's say, second from the top, that we click on Register of Committals for Trials. And it will then take you to the description, and you can see if it's relevant to your research. You will notice under locations, it also tells you where the record is held. In this case, you'll see Western Sydney Record Centre, which is at Kingswood. But keep in mind, there are regional examples listed in there where it may give you the Regional Archives Centre. In that case, you need to contact the Regional Archives Centre where the records are held. And it's always a good idea just to check with the Regional Archives Centre. You can see from the map of New South Wales, you can easily see where the Regional Archives Centres are located, such as Armidale, Broken Hill, Newcastle, Wagga Wagga, Wingecarribee and Wollongong, and records of that local area may well be kept at that Regional Archive Centre. You may also want to have a look just to see, or to contact the Regional Archive Centre to see if they have any more records that have yet to be entered into our collection search. Now, just some other court records that I just wanted to mention, because many people, when they're looking for Coroner's Courts records, they often end up going through Courts of Petty Sessions records, but Coroner's records, even though they're heard in many instances at the local courthouse, the records are kept separately. So you should see Research A to Z, and go to I for inquests and read about the information there. I'd also like to mention a court that many people may not have heard of, the Court of Requests. It covered the period of time from 1823 through to 1859, and it was limited to amounts of money not exceeding £10. By 1842, the jurisdiction encompassed actions relating to the recovery of debts, damages, unfinished work, unpaid wages, rent, use of money, accounts, bills of exchange, promissory notes, trespass, and trover. And trover means the finding and wrongful use of another's goods. In January 1847, Courts of Requests were abolished outside the county of Cumberland. They kept going in the Sydney area. In their place, the Courts of Petty Sessions were to hear and determine any civil claims for amounts up to £10 or £30 if all parties consented. So just keep in mind, when you're looking at local court records, you're generally looking at minor matters. Do have a look at the records that we have for your particular area for the local courts. And do keep in mind that what we now know as local courts were previously called Courts of Petty Sessions and started off as being the bench of magistrates.